This episode is presented to you by NFL Sunday Ticket, now on YouTube and YouTube TV. With NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube and YouTube TV, you can watch your favorite team's out-of-market Sunday games, plus watch up to 4 games at once with Multiview. Don't miss the race to the playoffs. NFL Sunday Ticket is now just $39 when bundled with YouTube TV, where you get even more football. Visit youtube.com/Spotify offer to sign up now. Lowest price on YouTube TV with base plan. Rest of 2023 season. Terms and embargoes apply. No cancellations.
Apple Gift Card is a practical gift that unlocks a world of entertainment and fun. You can send it via email or give a physical card to your loved ones. Your friends and family can spend it on their favorite Apple services, including Apple subscriptions. Apple Gift Card can be used to buy all things Apple: products, accessories, apps, games, movies, TV shows, iCloud Plus, and more. Visit apple.com for details and to send Apple Gift Cards to your friends and family this holiday season.
The holidays are a time to feel and create joy. And what could be more joyous than the look on her face as she unwraps a stunning new jewelry piece from Blue Nile? How about getting 50% off your purchase? Blue Nile offers premium quality, priced below traditional retail. Their online experts are available 24/7 to answer any questions and make sure you've picked the perfect gift. For a limited time, you can get 50% off at BlueNile.com. That's 50% off at BlueNile.com.
Hello and welcome to the Paddock and the Pavilion with Stephen Wallace. In each show, Stephen will interview someone connected to the world of horse racing or cricket.
The world of cricket was thrown into turmoil in the summer of 1977 when Australian media tycoon Kerry Packer signed up many of the world's best players to play World Series cricket in direct competition to established international cricket. In today's episode of What Was It Like To, I was joined by Rick McCosker, the former Australian Test player of the 1970s and 1980s, who explained the reasons why he signed up and what it was like to play World Series cricket. What was it like to play World Series cricket?
A good question, Stephen. Lots of memories. Initially, very exciting. It was tough. We were playing with and against the best cricketers in the world every game. So it was tough. A lot of hard travelling. Disappointing after a while in the response from the media and from the administration. But then I guess in hindsight, we should have expected what eventually occurred. So that was, that was difficult times in some ways. As I mentioned, exciting in others, but difficult because of the way we were treated, the media and by administration. So we had to overcome that. But putting that aside, it was very exciting and it was wonderful to be part of something as big as this and something new and something that we felt was important. And I knew myself personally that when it came to a decision, irrespective of what I said, it was going to happen anyway. And I wanted to be part of this because it was going to be something worldwide, something at world level, even though I was initially in Australia, but we were playing against world-class players all the time. So I wanted to be part of it.
Well, thanks for that introduction. I'd like to now look back at your journey in World Series cricket. When were you first approached? The centenary test finished on the 17th of March, 1977. You were, at the time, suffering from your broken jaw. But when were you first approached about the World Series cricket?
The first day of the centenary test was the 13th. I'm pretty sure it was the 13th. Probably 2 or 3 days before that, I was approached in Melbourne. We were down there as part of the promotion of the centenary test, and we're in Melbourne. And I had a call from 2 guys who I'd never met, John Cornell and Austin Robertson, and they asked me, could they have a meeting with me? And we met pretty clandestinely in a hotel in Melbourne, so it just, to me, it just completely out of left field. Even though in hindsight I realised that I certainly wasn't first approached, and there were others obviously more senior players who had been approached and before they got to me, but I wasn't aware of that at the time. And so that was the initial contact about 3 days before the start of the centenary test.
So you don't know whether many of the other players before that test had been approached, but it sounds like they had been.
Well, they would have been, for sure. I knew I wouldn't have been the first one, but it was part of the whole process was amazingly kept secret. And even probably a month later, by the time we were in England for the 77 tour, I certainly didn't know who else had been approached. And I had my suspicions, obviously. There was the Chappells and Walters and Marsh and Lilly and those guys, so I knew they would have been approached, but no one said anything. It had never been discussed amongst, certainly amongst at a team level, and I certainly was not aware. But again, I knew that if this was going ahead, there would have been others approached. As I said, I was approached 2 or 3 days before the centenary test, but I told John and Austin, I was not going to even think about it before the centenary test because this was the most important match, and I didn't even want to consider it. And so I didn't, and I completely put it out of my mind until after the centenary test, after the match. And then straight after the match, we flew back to Sydney, or I had to fly back to Sydney. I had to go back into hospital and have a jaw operation, and but through communications, I was contacted again and asked to make a decision, asked not to discuss this with anybody except my wife, and not to get legal advice, not to speak to my teammates, my friends, anybody. So it was a decision that we had to make by ourselves. And so it was tough times, but and so a little bit unnerving, and because we're uncertain as to where all this was going to lead and what the consequences would be. But being a little naive, I guess, not thinking through exactly how dire these consequences were going to be. So, in some ways we weren't really prepared for what eventuated. But, so we just had to accept what did eventuate. And so, but decision was made for a couple of reasons. The main one was that I knew that if I was approached, then the best of the Australian team would also be approached. And so I wanted to continue playing with the best players in our country and playing against the best players in the world. So that was the initial. The second thing was this was something perhaps a bit radical, but something that we thought was necessary because of the attitude of the authorities in Australia, cricket authorities, towards us as players. We couldn't see any future from a financial point of view for us players. And at that point in time, I was 30 years of age. I had family, house in Sydney with a mortgage, and so had a job in a bank. And so because of the time constraints that we were asked to play Test cricket, and I was finding it more and more difficult to continue my work in the bank, and they were finding it more difficult to continue to employ me. So when the news about World Series broke out, then that was the end of the road as far as my employment with the bank. So, in fact, prior to leaving for the 1977 tour of England, I had to take leave without pay, and so that was going to be very difficult from a financial point of view because we weren't paid very much at all. As a single person, I could have existed, but married with 2 children and a house with a mortgage was becoming more and more difficult. So that was another matter that determined our decision.
Yeah, I was reading that for a test player, you were getting $400 a match at that time.
That's correct, yeah. Plus, we would get a daily allowance, which allowed us to go to Macca's and have a Big Mac and maybe a coffee if we're lucky. So that was it. And so that was, obviously part of the reason why. And we couldn't see that this was going to change. There was nothing that we could see from the attitude of the authorities that this was going to change in any way. So we felt that we had to do something, and so that was why the initial discussions first started, through Dennis Lilly to Austin Robertson, who was his agent, and to John Cornell, who was obviously right-hand man for Kerry Packer.
Well, you brought the main man in there, the media tycoon, Kerry Packer, who actually was only 39 at the time. When did you first meet Kerry Packer? And you must have really trusted him when the concept came up, because they had no grounds to play on when you first announced it.
No, we first met Kerry. Well, I personally met Kerry in the Dorchester Hotel in London during our tour of 77 when we were over there. That was my initial meeting. Obviously, there was Ian and Greg Chappell and Dennis Lilly had lots of time with him in the planning exercise. But yeah, look, we did our research. We had a pretty fair idea how big Kerry Packer and the Nine Network were, and we understood his reasons for wanting, to getting involved. Obviously, it was a business decision for him initially. He wanted the rights to cricket. He wanted the opportunity to be able to negotiate with the Australian Cricket Board for the rights to Test cricket, and he felt that he had a right to be part of those negotiations, but he was coming up against a brick wall, just as we were coming up against a brick wall. So, so I guess to a certain extent we had faith in him. We had faith in the Nine Network. We had faith in John Cornell. And so that was formed part of our collective decisions, which we didn't have an opportunity to discuss until later when we all knew who else had been contracted and who was involved. And so that wasn't until we were into the 77 tour in England. For me personally, and I don't know what involvement he had with the other guys' employment, but from my perspective, I was basically shown the door by the bank that I had worked for 15 years, and that was that. But that was okay from my point of view, because I knew my future as a banker wasn't something that I was really excited about, the way that the banking industry in Australia was going. And so I was part of many bank employees who left around about that time and a bit later. So that wasn't a real issue for me, because just after the World Series and the board got back together again, I was offered employment and a move to Newcastle, which was very timely from our point of view, because we wanted to move out of Sydney and had a young family. We wanted to move out there, so I had an opportunity of being employed in Newcastle and still be able to play Shield cricket and Test cricket for as long as I could. So that part didn't worry me, but the personal involvement with Kerry from different things, he was very interested. As we went along, we found out that he's very interested in lots of things. During, I can't remember, it was the first season or the second season, a couple of our guys, I know Doug Wallace and Ross Edwards were having fairly lean trots. And so he arranged and paid for extra practice sessions for them. And he got personally involved and wanted them to have every opportunity they could to practice, because he knew that we weren't allowed to, we're ostracised by our state associations, the board and our clubs, that we couldn't attend our own club practices, our state practices. So we're basically on our own. So he was aware of that, and he gave us as many opportunities as possible. So as far as Kerry, our relationship with Kerry, he was a very tough man. He obviously was a big decision for him and a big risk for him. He was putting up all the money. So we understood that. He asked a lot from us, but he backed us. He had our back. And we felt comfortable with that and felt confident that he had our back. So from that point of view, we felt that we were okay, even though there were we were not treated very well by the media and by authorities. We knew that at least we had one guy on our side, and became even more comfortable for us when Richie and Daff Benno joined World Series and become involved. And for us, that was a big thing, big important measure. And Kerry obviously knew that, and I'm guessing he paid Richie and Daff a lot of money, but from his point of view, it was worth it. And they really got involved, and they became the I guess the contact and the between us as players and Kerry and his business hierarchy. And so that was important. And obviously with Richie's media involvement and Daff's organising ability, it made a whole heap of difference, especially in that first year when they were trying to get it established.
Must have given World Series cricket a lot of credibility, having Richie involved.
Yeah, and I think this might have surprised the cricket authorities to a certain extent. And so I don't know whether it did or not, but I'm pretty sure it would have, because I don't think they expected something like that to happen.
Well, the story broke on the 9th of May 1977 in the UK. Kerry Packer had signed 35 of the world's best cricketers. 13 of the 17 in the Australian tour party were included. He'd set up an international cricket series to play Test cricket and one-day cricket. I think it was for 3 summers, when it was first set up. Was
initially,
that right?
Initially, that was the case, yeah. And, so we were I got no idea of the contract details of any of the other players, and I didn't ask, and no one asked me. But I was only contracted. I was actually contracted for 2 years, but paid for 1, and so that was all that I was aware of.
Did that development affect the performance of the Australian team, and were there some divisions in the side because some people weren't in the Packer series during that tour?
To be honest, I think yes, there probably was. We probably didn't realise to the full extent at that time. Our team in 77 was nowhere near the same team as 2 years previously in 75. It was a lot less experienced, And there were 2 or 3 members of the team who hadn't been contracted to World Series cricket. And whilst we tried very hard to allow that to have an effect, I think it was very difficult not to have some effect. And I think in the end it did. Apart from Greg Chappell, our performances were pretty ordinary, particularly myself.
1977-78, the first World Series summer. What was the build-up like to the first game at VFL Park, Melbourne, on the 2nd of December 1977?
That was a difficult time. It was virtually Channel 9 network versus the rest of the world to a certain extent. So it was a difficult time. The network and Richie and all those people involved did the absolute best they could, but it was a difficult time. And it was a bit disappointing initially. The acceptance by the Melbourne people was very limited, and certainly it had a lot to do with the adverse media from all the other networks, particularly the ABC. So it was a difficult time for us, but we had to go ahead. It was all set to go, but unfortunately, we didn't have any grounds initially, big grounds to play on. We didn't have the MCG, we didn't have Sydney Cricket Ground, none of those. So the initial first game was at the football park at Waverley, which is way out in the suburbs of Melbourne. So from that point of view, it would have been difficult for people to get there anyway. But there were a few people there, and it was exciting for us. But it was a bit difficult after we'd played, a couple of months earlier at the MCG in front of 60,000, 70,000 people. This was a bit different. But we were all in coloured clothing. The lights weren't brilliant. They were okay. They were brilliant. And so that was how we started. And I remember vividly the first over of World Series cricket, because I was facing up to Andy Roberts, and even though we'd sort of had a couple of trial hits beforehand, this was the real thing, and these guys were keen to be shown as the best in the world, and so I didn't even last the first over, and I think if I recall correctly, I might have been dismissed for no score whatsoever, and so that was my introduction to World Series cricket.
Rick did in fact face the first ball in World Series cricket when Andy Roberts bowled to him at VFL Park, Melbourne. As Rick recalled, he was out in the first over, second ball to be precise, for no score, caught by Viv Richards at third slip.
But from then on, things improved gradually. It took a while, but it did take on. It took a lot of perseverance from, I'm guessing, money and negotiations by Kerry and the Nine Network, and negotiations with the Australian Cricket Board, and court cases and all sorts of things happening behind the scenes. But in the meantime, we were playing cricket, which was good from our point of view, but it was tough. As I said, we were playing against the best in the world. We were either playing a West Indies team, which was an absolutely magnificent team at that point in time, or we're playing against a rest of the world team, which in addition to the West Indian players had, the best of the world. And there were 4 or 5 South Africans who were very hungry to get involved in all of this, and to be playing this level of cricket they hadn't been able to play before for some time. So it was all tough. We had there were 2 parts to it. There was the super tests, which the number 1 Australian team was involved in, and then there was what they call the Cavaliers, which was the second tier. And I played in both. We had a lot of travelling to do. We played on some substandard grounds, sometimes in front of small crowds, sometimes crowds that weren't 100% with us, but it was an opportunity for them to see world class players in different places in country areas. So from that point of view, that worked, and it was good for the local people. But it was still difficult, and it was hard to play cricket against the best in the world under conditions that weren't exactly brilliant in a lot of cases. But yeah, it was all exciting, and this was part of what we knew we had to do, and this was all part of it. We knew that things would get better.
This episode is brought to you by Google Pixel, the official fan phone of the NBA and WNBA. The new Pixel 8 and Pixel 8 Pro are built different. How? Take the Audio Magic Eraser tool that helps block out distracting crowd noise so your play-by-play commentary sounds crystal clear. The only phone engineered by Google brings out the audio you care about so your videos sound as crisp as they look. Learn more at googlestore.com/pixelnba. Audio Magic Eraser requires Google Photos app. May not work on all audio elements.
Rick goes on to talk about the key match in World Series cricket, the day-night match between Australia and the West Indies at the Sydney Cricket Ground on the 28th of November 1978. A match watched by over 50,000 people.
And the turning point was the day-night match on the Sydney Cricket Ground, when the gates were opened and that one-day game under lights at the SCG, when the ground was absolutely full, and it was an amazing sight. Unfortunately, I wasn't playing that game, but I witnessed it, and it was just absolutely amazing atmosphere. And from then on, it just blossoms, and it just got better and better and bigger. And I think the public realised through a lot of advertising and media slogans, "Come on, Aussie, come on," and all that sort of stuff. That become sort of household jingles, and so that was all part. And so a lot of it was as a result of work that was done behind the scenes, particularly from guys like John Cornell, and that was really his role, and he was very good at it. And so it started to really blossom, and to a certain extent, we could see the end of the road as far as World Series versus the establishment was concerned.
Just to give a bit of context, in that first summer of World Series cricket, you scored, you played in 5 of the 6 Super Tests. You scored a century in the last match against a bowling attack of Roberts, Imran Khan, Joel Garner, Wayne Daniel and Tony Gregg, and the World 11 in that match. So just as you said earlier, Gordon Greenidge, Barry Richards, Viv Richards, Zahir Abbas, Asif Iqbal, Tony Gregg, Imran Khan and Alan Knott. It just tells you the standard of opposition that you were playing against.
Yeah, not a bad team. Yeah. So I remember batting a long time with Greg Chappell, and we had a double century partnership. And so that was good, but it was tough. And because of the opposition and some of the wickets, that this was the time when period when the first used the drop-in wickets, and they were fairly untried. So it was a bit of an experiment, but they weren't always totally true. And when you're playing against opposition like that, it was a bit difficult at times to be an opening batsman when you're facing against the fast bowling of the West Indies and Imran Khan and those guys. It was hard work, but
and no helmets as well, and no helmets as well.
Well, yeah, it was difficult, and especially after the centenary test. Still coming to grips with that. So it was it was hard going, but it was exciting, and eventually, it all came together. And
truce was broken on the 30th of May. This is between the Australian Cricket Board and Channel 9, 30th May 1979. You'd just come back from a World Series tour of the Caribbean, and you actually played in the very last Super Test where you scored 35 and 20.
That's right. Yeah, and that was an exciting tour. I hadn't been to West Indies before. I was really looking forward to that. Exciting, tiring, dangerous. But as it turned out, we arrived at Jamaica, and the first day we arrived, we were told, don't go out of the hotel by yourself. And we were told by the authorities that there were so many murders every night in Kingston, Jamaica, and we weren't to go out by ourselves. So we didn't. The first game was a one-day game in Kingston, Jamaica, and I was hit on my right forefinger by Michael Holding and broke the finger. That was a good start to the tour. So I had to go to the hospital and have it put in plaster. And so that was the end of my cricket for a few weeks. And as it turned out, I really missed the cricket and I missed playing in the Super Tests. But it meant that I had been able to spend time going ahead of the team. We were doing some coaching clinics, and I was working with some absolutely fantastic guys, Lance Gibbs, Joel Garner, Wes Hall, and Garfield Sobers in different places. And it was an absolutely amazing time, and I really enjoyed the association with those guys. And that was good, but didn't spend much time with the team at all until we got to Guyana for the second last test. And that was the time when we'd had about 2 or 3 days of torrential rain leading up to the first day of the test match. And there was no way possible that the match would start on time. And in fact, for the first 2 days, there was not a ball bowled and there was no chance. On the third day, unfortunately, very early in the morning, and one of the local authorities made an announcement over local radio that the gates were open and the game would start on time. And not one of us players or the umpires had any chance, could see any chance that this game was going to get started any time during the day. But the upshot of that was that we arrived at the ground about 9:30, 10 o'clock, sun was shining, the ground was full. And we knew that there was going to be some trouble here because no one in the world the game could start. The crowd had been there since about 8 o'clock that morning with their bottles of rum. And by about 10 o'clock, 10:30, most of those bottles had been consumed. And so it went on and on and on. And Douglas Sanghue and his brother umpire kept going out and making inspections, but they knew there was just no chance. In the end, the crowd got lost patience and stormed the ground. And, first of all, they threw all their bottles onto the ground. Then they threw park benches and all that stuff onto the ground. Not satisfied with that, they then got onto the ground, grabbed all their bottles and started throwing the bottles at the players' pavilion where we were. And a lot of the bottles were coming through the glass windows of our dressing room, and there was glass flying around everywhere. So it got worse and worse, and there was huge noise, and we thought, we were in big trouble here. We had a security guard in our room, but at that point in time, we looked around, the security guard was lying underneath the table. He didn't want to know what was going on, so it was up to us. Some of us at that point in time had helmets, and so whoever had helmets had them on, and we had pads on and gloves and bats in hand, and we were ready to defend ourselves because at that point in time, the crowd was just outside our door, and it had become a mob, and we thought we were in real trouble. But just when we thought that we were in big trouble, we heard gunfire, and we realised, we were told later, that the riot squad had just arrived, and they arrived just in time. So we were told that they were firing rubber bullets, but we were never quite sure whether they were rubber bullets or real ones. About half an hour later, when the crowd had been dispersed by the riot squad, a bus had turned up right next to the dressing room, and we were raced onto the bus and taken back to the team hotel. We looked at the ground, and there was just such a mess that we looked as if there'd been a tornado that hit the ground. There was such a mess. We had a meeting back at the hotel, and some of us wanted to leave immediately and go home. We'd had enough. But wiser heads prevailed, particularly our captain, Ian Chappell, and Greg. I mean, they'd been to West Indies before, and they knew that this wasn't really against us personally. It was because they were starved of Test cricket, and they really wanted to watch us play. So we stayed. Next day, we went to the ground. Sun was shining. The game started on time, and it was as if nothing happened. Had happened previously. Crowd thoroughly enjoyed the game. I wasn't playing in that game. I was still recovering from a broken finger. But it was an unbelievable atmosphere in Guyana. So, yeah, that was that. And then we played the last test in Antigua, and I played that game. And as you said, I got a 30 and a 20, something like that.
In part 2 of What Was It Like to Play World Series Cricket, coming soon, Rick McCosker reflects on the project and considers its impact on the world of cricket.
Thank you for listening to The Paddock and the Pavilion. You can download the show on Apple Podcasts,
Amazon Music,
SoundCloud, Stitcher and Spotify.
Follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at The Pad and Pav. Don't forget, if you like the show, please do leave us a rating and review.
Sports Social Podcast Network.
Let's face it, most people aren't making massive turkey feasts on the regular, and after 364 days of not thinking about it, it can be hard to get that bird just right. That's where Instacart, the holiday rescue app, comes in. From getting all the ingredients to prep a full seasonal spread to getting last-minute swaps in a turkey emergency, Instacart has everything a holiday host needs to save face and save dinner. And right now, if you download Instacart, you get free delivery on your first 3 orders and delivery in as fast as 1 hour. Offer valid for a limited time. $10 minimum per order. Additional terms apply.